Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Sustainable Commodities podcast, a podcast to help people navigate the ever-changing world of sustainability and sustainable commodities. I'm Barnaby Patchett, MD of 199 Agency, a marketing and comms agency working in sustainability, and with me
is Judith Murdoch from Murdoch Associates, and we specialise in forest risk commodities.
Now, today on the podcast, I'm very excited. We've got an extra special guest. We'd like to welcome Santiago Gowland, CEO of the Rainforest Alliance, the world-leading NGO that spent the last 4 decades working tirelessly to restore the balance between people and nature. We've got so many questions we'd like to ask Santiago, but on this episode we're going to be talking primarily about regenerative agriculture and the Rainforest Alliance's new regenerative agriculture certification standard.
So to start off with, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And I would be shocked if people don't know who Rainforest Alliance is, but there might be somebody that isn't aware of Rainforest Alliance and the history. So a bit about yourself and Rainforest Alliance, please.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. Well, I'm Argentinian, and I spent most of my life working in the private sector, trying to transform companies like Unilever, Nike, Estee Lauder, focused on sustainable business and innovation mainly. And then I joined the Nature Conservancy for 5 years, and then I was asked to, help with the Rainforest Alliance, lead the new chapter of this organization. And, when I look at this, we, all of us, were born in this very special generation, this kind of a critical point in time where, our planet and the critical ecosystems are really at risk. And I tend to think about it like we are all in. This is like one of the campaigns of the Rainforest Alliance, because we're all in this, spaceship in one way or another. Whatever we're doing, if we're working on sustainability or, doing other things, we are all tied together in the destiny of our planetary health. And the work you do with the podcast and the work we do on tropical forest is particularly important because tropical forests are acupuncture points on planetary health. They have disproportionate biodiversity and living carbon, right? And they also have incredible indigenous wisdom in those tropical forests and people living in poverty, right? So the transformation of the commodities that we work in is absolutely crucial to, future generations, that they can enjoy the planet we have. And the Rainforest Alliance is an amazing organization. It has 40 years now, almost 40 years. It was founded by Daniel Katz, who's still the chair of our board. And he used to say something that I love. The Rainforest Alliance is so practical that it's radical. And what's that radical point? The radical point is this alliance between people who choose a product, consume a product, and that they can be connected to the person that produces. And that's the alliance. It's a human alliance. It's acknowledging that I want to do something that is good for me, but also good for others that are impacted by my decision. And so that model of, bringing people together in supporting practices and investments on making nature better and people better is the whole concept of the Rainforest Alliance. Now it grew massively. We work with around 7,000 companies, more than almost 8 million producers in 62 countries. And our frog is in more than 42,000 packs every year. So I think it's, quite successful, but still we need to accelerate and scale it more so that the whole consumption, right, ends up being a way to heal, protect, restore those places and not degrade them.
You've mentioned the frog, and we definitely wanted to talk about that, but it's probably quite good now to say we all recognize the frog. And, my background's palm oil, and I'm envious of the fact that you've got the logo on so many packs. What do you put the success of the frog logo down to?
Well, I think it's a combination, right? It's a combination of the standard became very reputable, right? And the frog as a brand captured the imagination of people. We've done some branding. You've seen the Follow the Frog campaign. We did one last year about pessimism is out. We are all in. We have an always on campaign. When you think about the challenge of our generation is as much a technical and supply challenge as it is a consumption and marketing challenge. And, in today's world, consumer voting with the wallet is crucial to accelerating the transformation of markets. So this is not a frivolous part of the model. The ability to mobilize billions of consumers thinking that I can do something, even if it's a small choice, that times millions of people will have an effect, is fundamental to our mission. So
It's such a broad remit, yours, I guess, at the Rainforest Alliance as well. I mean, when I think of the Rainforest Alliance, I do think of the logo, and certification is one of the big things that comes to mind. That Rainforest Alliance offers certification across lots of different commodities. I guess the ones that come to mind to me would be primarily coffee, cocoa, and tea. I know that that's changed a lot over the years. You've moved in and out of some. As Judith mentioned, our background's primarily palm oil. I know you moved away from certification on that. How do you choose which commodities to certify and to focus on?
yeah, it's a great question. Look, I mean, there's a couple of things, right? The first thing is we focus on commodities that are produced in tropical forests, right? So it is important that the work we do is to protect the rainforest. We are an alliance to protect the rainforest, and we realize that 90% of the destruction of tropical forests was coming from the expansion of agriculture frontiers. Also, almost 25% of global emissions come from agriculture. And so we realized that we needed to shift those market dynamics, not only to protect tropical forests, but at this point in time, to begin to heal, repair, restore, and regenerate those critical ecosystems, right? So it's not just about doing less harm. It is about forms of agriculture, and that takes me to the regen conversation later, that can actually give more than it takes from those places, right? And so we try to play in those markets, and going back to the frog, on commodities that are branded as well, right? So coffee and chocolates, for example, or tea, those are great examples of also bringing a little bit the North consumption, right? Developed markets like US, Europe, etc., to commodities that are produced in the South, and creating that alliance of shared responsibility. So people feel, what can I do in this situation, etc. Well, you can learn more, and you can be really connected to these practices on these commodities. So also we try to pick places where we can help. In the case of palm oil, you had the RSPO. So we don't want to be competing and kind of dividing. We said, okay, we did the traceability data for a long time, and it's also about avoiding the duplication, competition, incrementality of these models, and trying to converge. This is why the Rainforest Alliance merged with UTS, because we're trying to kind of also consolidate a bit the efforts.
That's interesting. That kind of competition between standards is something that I guess, it is a real issue, because if you've got multiple different ones, then how do you agree on on which is the best or which to go for?
Yeah, a little bit of competition, I think, is healthy. The problem is when standards undercut, corners, so that they can please some companies that are less compliant. When you leave third-party verification, for example, which is expensive, but it's important, because otherwise it's like you're doing an exam and you're marking in yourself, yes, I got an A. You need that kind of objective, independent audit also to bring credibility to the place, because one of the biggest risks, in my view, of our mission here is when people lose faith, when, there's so much greenwash, so much confusion, that people then end up, so lowering the bar is a very risky, kind of a road. And this is something now, competition and different ideas and innovating on better, propositions for the producer, for the markets, for the investors, for the consumers. I think that's important and healthy.
Yeah. And one of the things that cost is a really big thing. Probably won't stray too much into EUDR, but thinking about EUDR, some people have said, oh, well, if you're EUDR compliant, you don't need certification. Again, this is probably an example out of palm oil. And certification is expensive, but certainly EUDR does not do all of the chain of custody sections, obviously, that's offered in RSPO. Smallholders are really struggling. What do you think about cost of certification and smallholders?
Yes, that's for me an obsession, right? Because this works only when producers benefit disproportionately, almost irresistibly, right? Because at the end of the day, and if you know, like when you visit the field, and I was born in a farm, and farmers at the end of the day make decisions that are very practical. Yeah, like if they can't benefit, they don't see the benefit, then they will drop it, right? So one of the things that we do in our strategies continuously look for what's relevant for producers and what's relevant for market players as well, and try to kind of focus more and more the requirements on producer value. And we're launching this year the 1.4 version of the standard, which really create a very significant simplification of requirements and avoided complexity. And the lens we use is producer value and market value, right? Whatever is academic and, yes, the perfect is the enemy of the good, right? So when it becomes too complex to implement, then it doesn't work, So there needs to be that pragmatism also in the sector.
You're definitely talking my language there in terms of, I think that often our ideology and the sort of utopian thinking leads to almost a backlash. I guess we're seeing that almost in some of the global political and economic climate. It's a real shift in how sustainability is seen in certain political circles. How's that impacting on you and certification schemes?
Yeah, that's a really important question, right? Because it is changing, and also public funding is changing, and the political sort of climate is changing. But the thing is, we are rooted in grassroots as a Rainforest Alliance, and the person that gives us the mandate is the producer. And when you listen to the producer, they are facing extreme weather, situations, and productivity and yields are also threatened by those changes. And at the end of the day, you realize that the technical assistance we provide, the training, the support, the sustainability investments, the access to markets, all the practices are very valued by the producers because they can manage the farms better, right? And when you look at it from the corporate perspective, the name of the game now is resilience, right? Because when you think about it, by 2050, 50% of the land for coffee will be gone. And the same is happening with cocoa and tea. There is a real pressure by, global warming on land available for coffee. And this has two consequences. One is it can, drive to clearing more forest, or you need to begin to investing in healthy soils, more resilience, more adaptation, higher productivity. And that's not a political thing. It's a business survival thing, right? So companies are not in a point where they can say, okay, the political environment change, I'm going to drop sustainability, because this is essential to avoiding operational disruptions and to be able to stay in business, really.
Yeah, just picking up on that then. So climate change is meaning that a crop can't be grown in a certain area. So if it can't be grown there, or soil degradation, you're moving, trying to take virgin forest. Is that the message?
Yeah, that's happening. That's happening. It's already happening. I mean, in cocoa, it happened historically, So the point around, degrading a place and then moving to another one, and this is where UDR and real regulatory compliance is so important, right? Through market access mechanisms, because at the end of the day, if you invest in the soil, right? If you do shade trees, you do multi-cropping, you do mulching, you do kind of composting, et cetera, things that were, practices by millennia from indigenous communities. If we go back to really living more in harmony with nature, then you can see water regulation, water absorption, carbon absorption in the soils. You can see way more resilience in those farms than other farms, right? So yeah.
Is that how we need to sell it to those businesses that are reticent to commit to their obligations?
Yeah, it is kind of interesting because there is also a movement of decommoditization, right? So, for example, when you look at some brands like Nespresso or leading brands that are building a relationship with a sourcing base
Mm.
that is less commoditized. It's not that if you don't give me this price or this, then I go to another one. There is a longer term relationship, right, with the farmer. And this is for me the key, because that is the moment where you begin to invest in quality, in better kind of health in those soils, and so the alliance, the shared responsibility with the producer becomes real. When the market is completely commoditized, all the power is on the buyer.
Mm.
So they have all the optionality. It doesn't really matter. Your fate doesn't matter. If you had a drought or a flood, your problem. I'm going to other places, right? So this concept, I think, needs to change, and traceability and shared responsibility are a great bridge to begin to change that relationship.
Yeah. And that leads probably quite nicely into talking about regenerative agriculture and what Rainforest Alliance is doing.
Yeah, when you think about it, right? And I been to most of these tropical forests throughout my career, and now particularly, some of those are reaching a tipping point. The Amazon is reaching a tipping point. It's already, you can see changes in the hydrological cycles of the Amazon. And by the way, all of the rain in South America, except for Chile, comes from the Amazon humidity, right? And so what I realized is that we got to a point where this harm reduction is not enough. I want to reach to a point where I can drink a cup of coffee and I know I'm leaving the community and the environment better, not a little bit less worse, better, right? And that kind of net positive, that sort of is a journey, right? To get there, it's going to take time. And the regenerative agriculture practices go deeper into those areas of healthy soils, water, pesticide management, agriculture practices like shade trees and others. It goes deeper into carbon sequestration, water regulation, while maintaining human rights and social development as well, right? So for me, our region journey is one that takes us to that net positive future. And we are very committed to it, and also because the Rainforest Alliance has such credibility in the development of standards and frameworks, and this is such a kind of an undefined territory where it's prone to a lot of greenwash, right? Because companies and chemical companies and agriculture companies, they don't have their own definition. We felt that a definition that was objective, independent, non-for-profit, and from a credible, solid organization was needed. And so we moved into that space.
Yeah.
So how does your certification, or how will your standards sort of define regenerative agriculture, and how is it different to many of the sort of previous approaches? I know you mentioned your history at Unilever. They potentially had one, 15 years ago, a bit more?
Yes. When I was at Unilever, we did I was leading sustainability there, and we did the partnership between the Rainforest Alliance and Lipton and PG Tips. And I remember we were very proud of the sustainable agriculture standard of Unilever, right? And so we shared all of that knowledge, and we kind of cross-pollinated with the Rainforest Alliance, etc. So the region standard is not that different from what sustainable agriculture is as a concept, right? But what it does is it goes deeper into these areas of, healthy soils, resilience, adaptation, carbon sequestration. It really goes deeper. So what we are doing is introducing practices and outcomes that can really, demonstrate higher productivity at the end of the day by producers, and stronger claims of companies investing in, repairing soils and repairing landscapes, right? So So yes, it is based on the standard we had before, but it takes us further in that continuous improvement journey.
And is it just aimed at things like cocoa and coffee? And could it go into palm oil? The reason being is that you're absolutely right. The definitions are so broad. I don't think anybody really knows what the right definition is to start off with. So it would be good to get a fairly generic one. So maybe a couple of questions coming up here. What is the generic definition? And then what is commodity specific definitions? Would you see that lined up like that?
Yeah, in the generic definition, when you use the kind of the principles of agroforestry and permaculture, it's just a mixture of science. That I think there's little debate in terms of the definition, practice, and outcomes that from at least the NGO, academic, and science sector, right? And maybe the biggest difference is when you begin to see the business or corporate definitions, where they will always prioritize the economic viability before the ecological viability, right? And so that's what the tension becomes, right? But the point you make, Judith, is important, right? Because one of the things that make the region definition stronger is the customization at specific crops and specific areas. Because the broader you are, also the less relevant you are and the less credible you are to demonstrating actual improvements in the farm at a specific crop, specific country level. Because regenerative agriculture has different expressions in a way, or impacts, depending the area, where you may need to dial up one practice or another depending on the crop and the area. It's not the same a region farm in Costa Rica than in Minas Gerais or in Ghana, like it's different places, but the definition, the principles are the same, but the application is what matters. How is it being implemented, and is it, bearing the results?
So broad definitions and commodity specific tactics for implementation is the order of the day. Interesting.
Commodity specific and place specific as well.
Yeah.
We did benchmarks, and we can send you a definition and principles. It's super interesting to look at that, and then maybe comparing with other definitions, right? And definitely would be good to bring to the palm oil sector and to other sectors. It doesn't need to be the Rainforest Alliance particularly, but all of the stuff we do is open, right? So
no, I think that would be really useful, because I think there's a big confusion. And I'm asking because I know that I've started to do some work in palm oil, and a lot of people see, so particularly in oil, you're seeing rapeseed or perhaps soya, and then you start talking about palm oil, and it's very different because palm oil is grown in a different way. It's grown in a forest setting compared to rapeseed, which is more about the soil and rotation, etc., and doing other things. But definitely one thing that struck me is the cover crops that you can use, and that is something that's transferable. We were talking to our last guest about what he described as clean plantations, where everything had been taken off the ground and you just had bare soil, versus other plantations that had lots of vegetation, even though it wasn't a crop that they could harvest. It obviously had biodiversity and probably better quality. So the definitions would be fantastic to share more broadly.
yes, I will share that. And by the way, you can see, like, going back to regenerative, right? The difference between a farm that is already using those practices and one that is not. And we already measure in some of our, producer partners, the improvements in yield, in productivity, in resilience. Sometimes there is a flood or a big storm, whatever, and the region farms stand up back really quickly, because they have all this nature force in them, right? Whereas the other ones are so barren, right, that it kind of it really clears everything. A strong rain goes like pavement, and so that's what I think is people, companies, and producers begin to realize, and also some of those crops have, only kind of adaptation sort of benefits, but many of those multi-cropping have, bioeconomy, entrepreneurial income benefits as well that complement the income, right? So that's the way people used to farm in the past, and that's what's coming back.
Do you think legislation such as the EUDR could maybe be enhanced in the future by having a regenerative agriculture clause in it? So, thinking about putting things back or farming in a different way.
I don't know, if the certification standards are like a voluntary legislation, right? I mean, they are developed following the process. There is a lot of stakeholdering. There is a lot of, kind of a consultation before you publish a standard, right? And that's what makes them strong, right? And the objective, if you ask me, is that all of our practices are turned into compliance, into legislation, because then, the taxes and incentives and it would be aligning to the transition of agriculture and not exacerbating the problem, which is what's happening a little bit today, you know? So, but legislation tends to move a little bit slower, and even UDR, look at all the opposition it created for something that is such a no-brainer. Because, I mean, keep deforesting these places is suicidal, really,
Mm.
you know? And so, but yes, I mean, you're right. I think that legislation should, take more of a proactive stance on incentivizing that shift. And once you have legislation, then impact investment and many other market mechanisms get triggered, you know? So I hope we had more visionary, more responsible legislation for sure.
So going back to your certification standard, what's the timeline on that? So when's it coming? When will everything be announced? When will people be able to go, right, I can go and
Yeah.
get certified?
I'll say Q3, it's going to be published. I can't give you the exact date because it's embargoed. But I mean, in between Q3 and Q4, this is going to be live, and yeah, we have already a lot of interest
Mm.
of brands, a lot, and we hope again to be able to raise the bar, to give also producers better techniques for resilience and for productivity, and also give consumers more clarity on what they're buying into. And so we launched it with a QR code that also kind of increases transparency. We want to really engage and mobilize people to learn more, to land on what exactly is happening. And we don't want to overpromise because certification is not a silver bullet. I mean, remember the Rainforest Alliance, 50% of the Rainforest Alliance is landscape and community impact projects, right? So even though certification is I feel, the biggest success in the sustainability field in terms of scalability and in terms of, creating a level playing field, we complement certification in the risk areas in each landscape and community with a portfolio of impact projects that many of the brands that work with us invest in, right? And also multilaterals and also philanthropies, etc. So that combination of, the certification impact and the landscape and community impact is what really, I think, can create meaningful, long-lasting change.
And how will it work if someone's already got a certification in place? Maybe it's not yours, or maybe not say yours personally, Rainforest Alliance. Does it sit alongside it and go through the supply chain, or is it just about the actual farmer being certified, and then it's about having to pass traceability information down to the buyer? How does it work? Is it a supply chain?
Yeah, in the case of the Rainforest Alliance, if you are certified on our current sustainable agriculture standard, right, this is an add-on. You can comply with 13 more requirements and measure outcomes, and then you have levels, right, of achievement of bronze, silver, and gold in terms of how you are really driving regenerative agriculture. So it's kind of an addition, right? But if you're not certified by the Rainforest Alliance, you can also go straight to Regen if that's what you want. And you're going to get, a lot of what we have in the sustainable agriculture plus this, and you can enter directly into that. And what we also launched is a supply chain risk assessment or sourcing risk assessment, right? Because if you think about coffee, for example, right, 70% of the coffee volumes are not certified, not by us, by nobody, right? So you have a lot of the market that is not even in the first step of continuous improvement towards more sustainable agriculture. So we launched this risk assessment that also carries the UDR data points, right? So that those smallholders are not left out, and supply chains can sort of buy into our sourcing risk assessment and get the data points that they need to comply with UDR. So that's another thing. With the certification, you have UDR for free because all the data points and the GIS analysis, it's built in. But with this, people that are not certified, we also have this tool that I hope will also contribute to inclusion and a more fair implementation of UDR that doesn't leave anybody behind, really.
It's a big challenge. I mean, we see it time and time again. The path of least resistance in a lot of commodities is to cut out smallholders. That's the brutal truth of it. I guess certification like this, how does it bring those people back in? How does it drive inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, like in a way, two things I want to say about that, right? In a way, this ladder of continuous improvement, you need to meet producers where they are and give them what's most value for them and value for the market. So this sourcing risk assessment, for example, right? A smallholder that is not certified, it gives them the ability to have the data to sell to Europe, right? And that's massive, right? In terms of deforestation risk assessment, it also gives them the opportunity to identify where they have bigger risks and deploy the portfolio of projects that will offset that risk, right? And that's also super important. But the other thing that with the Rainforest Alliance and many of these certifications we do is we work where it hurts, really, where it matters most, right? And it's risky, because these are very complex, sometimes systemic issues. And from our mission perspective, we need to be where we are most needed, not where the market is easier. And that sometimes creates exposure to our brand and criticism, etc., because it is not perfect, but it's the best we have right now.
I guess that to me is such a fantastic step forward. But what do you think is the future for Rainforest Alliance? It's almost what next rather than what is the future? What next?
Look, I mean, for me, it's really clear. When I joined 4 years ago, we developed a 2030 strategy, and we realized certification is prone to change. We need to change it in multiple ways. One of the things we did is we need to change it. We need to decommoditize it to become more differentiated, to be more meaningful for producers and for markets and consumers, right? And so we created this staircase with sourcing risk assessment, which is second party verified, is something way more simple. Our current certification, the regenerative certification standard, which opens a new conversation with consumers, also connected to health and quality, because the more biology you put in the soil, also the more nutrition that you'll find in the foods you buy, right? We are developing other specialized offers like the climate and living income to go deeper into those areas, right? And we want to develop next year something we call, as a working title, Gold. We want to develop and begin to recognize farms that are already net positive, that you can already see that there's more carbon sequestered than emitted, that there's more biodiversity, created than displaced, that people are in a living income, and there's no poverty. I mean, poverty alleviation for real compared to everything else, right? Pesticide management. So we want to get to a point where we can recognize those farms and begin to show the pathway towards markets becoming the solution and not the key driver of habitat loss and social injustice.
A nice positive vision for 2030. I guess there's going to be some speed bumps and challenges along the way. I know at the time we're recording this, it's June 2025. earlier this month, there was a Guardian article, and it talked about some of the challenges that the Rainforest Alliance is potentially facing in tea, with the Kenyan government advising its tea companies to stop certification.
Mhm.
You know, how do you overcome challenges like that? What's the kind of approach?
Yes, the situation with tea is a complex one, right? Because there's something really positive going on in Kenya, which is it's the country with the largest level of certification, more than 90% of tea. And when you talk to producers, they recognize the benefit that brought them in managing the farm, increasing the productivity, sort of driving social development also for them, right? Uh, but there is a macroeconomic situation with tea, which is an oversupply. And when you have oversupply, supply and demand, the economics of supply and demand are difficult to force. When you have oversupply, your prices go down. In Kenya, coffee prices are going up because there is no oversupply of coffee, right? And so, what we are trying to do now with the Kenya government is how do we work across sectors, the government, all the cooperatives, factories, the brands, represented by the Ethical Tea Coalition Partnership and the Global Tea Coalition. How do we work on a model that can lower the cost of certification? And we did that with 1.4, our new standard, deliver more value to the producers, and also work on some of the other failures in the market, that are putting pressure on prices that at the end of the day, kind of damage producers, right?
Mm.
So it's a complex situation, but this is the kind of thing we need to do more of. We need to work across sectors because, I mean, we're an NGO. We are not a market player. We don't make money out of what we do. It's all invested back, right? So in a way, we want to be as helpful and effective as we can, but we can't do it alone. We need collaboration with the government and with the industry, and of course with the producers who give us the mandate.
Yeah, I think that's quite important, actually. Um, you are an NGO and you are investing your money. Maybe just explain that in a bit more. What happens? How are you funded? That would be a good
Yeah.
question.
So the Rainforest Alliance is more or less half and half, or 60-40, funded by the investment of companies in our standard, right? So once we kind of do the certify the farms and they get the seal and they buy that as a certified product, then they pay a royalty that then also and premiums to the producers in most categories. And the other percentage is grants and strategic philanthropy, etc. Right? But the point here is that the NGOs are, for me, right, and this is why after 20 years of working in the private sector, of course, you don't have bonuses nor equity nor nothing, right? It's a kind of a different dynamic, but the NGOs are so critical in today's world. And why? Why they're so critical? Because you have organizations that are absolutely mission impact first. They're not looking for kind of growth or profitability or whatever in terms of, more revenue for themselves. They're looking at growing their impact and the revenues in service of impact. So when we are successful, when we are relevant to the market and to investors, then we are relevant to producers. If we're not relevant, then, we lose that. So that for me is critical. The second point is we are ushering into this era of radical collaboration because the type of issues we have are so systemic that you need an independent, objective broker, convener, curator, facilitator of cross-sector collective action. And a lot of what's happening, or maybe in my perspective, the biggest, kind of a threshold we have now to conquer is the ability to own collectively owned or shared strategies on these places. How can we do what we can do, and brands do what they can do, and governments what they can do, and we are all committed to a more kind of thriving sector? And that radical collaboration, that pre-competitive collaboration, I think is the prerequisite for us seeing a shift in this incremental mindset towards a genuine shift of entire systems.
Well, that's I think, a lovely place to end on that kind of positive message. Thank you very much, Santiago, for your time. We'll put in the show notes some where to find more information about the Regenerative Agriculture Certification Standard. And thank you very much for joining us.
Yes.
Thank you. Really interesting conversation. I mean, I got carried away by just talking to you guys. We are like in a coffee table.
That's the best conversation. That's the best conversation, Santiago. And thank you very much to everyone for listening to the Sustainable Commodities podcast. And we'll catch you next time.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.